knowing what a character wants or desires helps the writer understand what drives that character. And that drive propels the plot. What they need is usually more of an internal issue, and that's something that the character doesn't necessarily know. But you, the author, have to know, or at least have to be able to figure it out.
Welcome to the Write It Scared podcast. I'm your host, Stacey Fraser, a formerly repressed creative soul turned fiction writer, story editor, and author accelerator certified fiction book coach. At Write It Scared, we tell the truth about why writing a novel is so hard by acknowledging that most writers grapple with two stories: the one they want to put on the page to the best of their ability, and the often subconscious internal story that prevents them from doing it. This show is designed to help you identify and rewrite the internal narrative holding you back while you discover and write the story you want to tell and learn all the tools to help you do that successfully. Join me each week for a new episode where we'll talk about writing to deepen our understanding of the craft and of ourselves as writers. Writing a novel is an inside job that we do not do alone. Welcome to Write It Scared. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hi, writer. Welcome back to the Write It Scared podcast. I'm your host, Stacey, and I am so thrilled to be back with you for another season. Today, we're going to jump into our first interview of season 2 of the podcast, and we will be talking to Michele Regenold about how to interview your characters to gain insight for your story and move through creative blocks. It's a fantastic conversation, and I'm going to give Michele a bio in just a moment. But before we jump in, I have a question for you. Would you like to plan and write your next novel or your first one with more confidence and less guesswork? Of course, right? Writing is hard. So let's make it easier. I have a free tool to help you do exactly that. First Draft Confidence is a free workbook and introductory guide to all the foundation work that my clients complete before they begin drafting. And it helps to prevent false starts and abandoned drafts. First Draft Confidence has 7 simple exercises designed to help you overcome mindset wobbles, learn how to organize your thoughts so that you can start to see the story, help you set up realistic writing expectations and a schedule that fits your life, test drive your story concept to see if it will support a full-length novel, and develop your cast of characters as well as a high-level outline that will work whether you're a pantser or a plotter or somewhere in between. So let's take as much guesswork out of this drafting business as we can to avoid the first draft flail. To download First Draft Confidence, go to writeitscared.co/novel planning guide, or check the link in the show notes. Okay, writer, now let's go on to our interview. Here is Michele's bio. Michele Regenold is a writer and an author accelerator certified book coach specializing in middle grade and young adult fiction. She holds an MFA in writing for children and young adults from the Vermont College of Fine Arts, as well as a master's degree in journalism and English from Iowa State University. Hi, Michele. Thank you for coming on the show today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, it's great to have you here. So I gave you a bit of a bio, but would you please share more about your journey to becoming a writer and a writing mentor with our listeners?
Sure. So way back in the 70s, when I was a little kid, my grandmother gave me Little House on the Prairie for Christmas. I'd been watching it on TV and didn't know it was based on a book. And so I realized, oh, the author's name's on the cover and it's in the book. She's writing about herself. I could write a book like that. So I'm 8, 9 years old, started to write everything that's happening in this notebook. And I asked my mom in the car one day, you can get this published? And she said, no. That was your first critique right there. I'm sure, there are at least two other little kids in the car at the same time, and she probably had no idea what I was really asking her. So that's where I got started. And I tried over and over again to finish a novel as a kid, because I would always start just like you do when you read, start at the beginning and try to work your way to the end. But then just didn't quite work that way. I didn't finish a novel until I wrote fan fiction. I wrote a complete Star Trek novel when I was in grad school.
Wow.
That was so fun because I knew all those characters really well. And I think that's why it worked. But then I got involved in a critique group, and they were mostly children's writers, and I rediscovered my own love of kids' books I started working on a fantasy novel, which also hasn't seen the light of day. Then I got an MFA in writing for children and young adults from Vermont College of Fine Arts, in part because of a woman who was in my critique group. I paid the bills by doing technical writing, webmaster work, writing for private college, their magazine, their website, and also by teaching writing. So writing has been part of my world forever, writing and reading. And then in 2021, I got certified as an author accelerator book coach. And that just opened things up in a different way where it all makes way more sense to me now.
That's how.
I can see the strategy and the planning and why that can be so helpful, because I was such a dedicated pantser, and that's why I was flailing for so long. Doing both is the way that works best for me.
Yeah. I found that to be true for myself too. If I plot too much, not good. If I don't plot at all, or not, it's not even just plotting. It's like thinking about the different layers of character development and stuff like that, which is what we are going to get into today. It's not good either. Because I was like you, I just used to start at the beginning, once upon a time, and try to go to the end. And those never worked out. Yeah. So, or they were incredibly painful to fix.
Right.
Okay. So we're going to talk about character development and how to do that really well, because you have a really cool tool that you're going to fill us in on in a little bit. So from a perspective as a writing coach and an experienced novelist, what is vital for writers to know about their characters, and what is the danger if they don't?
I think there are really three core things for the main character and the major supporting characters that it's really helpful to know: what they want, what they need, which is not necessarily the same thing, and what they fear. So knowing what a character wants or desires helps the writer understand what drives that character. And that drive propels the plot. It's character-oriented fiction. So what decisions does a character make because of what they want? What actions do they take because of what they want? What they need is usually more of an internal issue, and that's something that the character doesn't necessarily know. But you, the author, have to know, or at least have to be able to figure it out. You might not know at the beginning, and that can be harder to figure out, but you do need to figure it out at some point to make it really compelling character-driven fiction. And the fears, this is something that I uncovered more recently. Knowing what your character fears can help you create interesting obstacles for them.
Well, that's really good. I agree with those three things, being like the top of the list. The wants, if you know what your characters want and what they value about what they want, it will help you understand what they're willing to risk to get it. And that will help you kind of calculate stakes and amp up your conflict. Just like you said, you can figure out what kind of obstacles are really going to get in the way. And the need, it's such a hard time with this until someone finally told me what you just said, is that it's not something the character is aware of. I just could not wrap my head around that for the longest time. And it's like either something they're not aware of at all, or it's something they pay lip service to. Like, wouldn't it be nice if I could? It's so nice that you have that, but I'll never have that kind of thing. And I like to think of this way. The need is kind of like the thing they have to learn. If they're going to go from not very fulfilled to a more fulfilled place by the end of the book, or it's the thing they don't learn, and it creates their demise if it's not a happy book.
Yeah, that's good. I think for kid-lit writers, that's probably most appropriate, that the negative spin on that for the antagonist.
Good point. Yes. And so you said, who are what characters do you need to think about these things for? Your main character, your protagonist, your main side characters, and whoever the antagonistic force is in your story too.
Right?
Yeah. We always think about it's our protagonist driving the story bus, but it's not always that way.
No, definitely not. And mysteries, it's often the antagonist who is driving it because of the crime that they commit.
Yeah, there's a plot underneath the plot.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So, all right, my hat is off to anyone writing a mystery. I'm writing a mystery right now, and sometimes it feels like I'm just trying to pull out my fingernails. So painful sometimes to think about all these different layers. So, which is why I think books are made in layers, because there is no way that you can nail all this up in the first go.
No, absolutely not. You have to know what's going to be on the page and what's not. There's lots of stuff that's going on that your readers are never going to see, but you need to know.
Yeah, it's like the iceberg theory, right?
Yeah.
So, recap was vital for writers to know about their characters and why the want, the need, and what they fear. How much of these aspects do you think a writer needs to know before they start writing their book?
I think it's really helpful to know the bare minimum of the wants and the fears for your protagonist and your antagonist. But, everybody's different. So if people just want to discover that in a pantsing kind of way, they can. But I think plotters probably have an advantage if they're going to spend the time to figure that out and use that to help them drive the plot instead of just discovering it all on the way.
Yeah, and it's really hard to know in your first couple of books, like what's going to work for you. It's kind of a process. Try and err and learn from your mistakes.
And I think it varies from book to book, too, because the novel that I'm revising right now is, I think of it as contemporary realistic, but it's actually probably speculative because it's about a dead dog who goes back to Earth and, because he wants to return to his girl and blah, blah, blah. But that's the other series that I'm trying to find an agent for is actually a mystery series. So completely different kinds of stories.
Right. Well, coming from a place of writing a mystery or suspense, knowing what happened and who caused it to begin with I could not write without that. Yeah, I don't believe I could. So maybe there are people out there who can. So I think personality factors into it a little bit as far as how you discover characters. But what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Because there are writers who like to think through before they ever put anything on paper or on a computer. They spend a lot of time thinking things through. I have to actually write it out either on paper or on a computer and see those words. That helps me with that process. So that's partly process, partly personality, I suppose. I'm not somebody who likes to talk things out with other people, like in advance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think probably some writers, maybe more extroverted writers, do like to do that sort of thing. So, yeah, you have to find what's most comfortable for you. Use that to your advantage. I mean, hard enough as it is. You don't want to stop at a disadvantage.
So what would you say are some common struggles that writers have when getting to know their characters?
I think there is a lot of advice in writing books and online and, writing conferences and stuff like that about like little character sheets where they ask you to fill in your character's name and what they look like, their socioeconomic level, and then whatever, all that external stuff like you might use for a dating app. Loves puppies, loves to fly fish. All that stuff is, I think, fairly easy. Doesn't take a lot of emotional energy to come up with, especially if you're just, stealing bits and pieces from people you know. It's the internal stuff, the character's feelings, their emotions, especially when they are very different from your own, that can be both harder to understand and to convey.
Oh, true. Especially when you're trying to craft a villain and you don't think like that.
Yes. So one of my book coaching clients is writing a dark YA fantasy with a naive girl as the main character. And it's first person present tense. Pretty straightforward. But her antagonist is a supernatural character who can move through time. And he doesn't really have physical presence in the world we would consider real. So when we first started working together, it was clear to me that the supernatural character was pretty one-dimensional, pretty flat. He was stalking the girl, the main character. He was clearly a predator of some type. But why did he choose her? How does his predatory behavior work? How does he kidnap girls if he doesn't actually have a form, a body? Where does he keep them? I got all sorts of questions before. And my client, who is a pantser, haven't thought through that stuff yet. where we started. So I encouraged her to interview him. And this was some of the creepiest shit I've ever read it. Look up. Oh. So yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That a cop, it sounds like Addie LaRue, which is not young adult, but has a villain that is very similar.
That's
So
the
No, the V.E. Schwab is the author's name. The book is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Well, phenomenal book. It's a historical fantasy
okay.
with a very strong contemporary story present. Yeah. Dual timeline and all, and the past timeline is historical. It's a beautiful book. Anyway, so that would be an interesting thing for her to read, to wrap her head around her villain, maybe. Very cool. Well, I love how you said I had her interview them. So that would bring us right into us talking about this really cool tool that you have to help writers get to know their characters on that intimate level, internal level. And it's called Interview for Insight. And I used it to interview all 4 of my main characters. And I had been stuck, Michelle. So I had plotted a novel and then I had drafted and I was about halfway, a little more than halfway through the draft. And then I took a novel intensive workshop because I knew there were some things that were not gelling and I got a little stuck as far as how to get back on track and how to fix it. And using your Insight for Interview really helped me unlock these people. So tell me about this tool. I'll shut up about it, but you tell me about it. And yeah, and how it works.
So basically, Interview for Insight is a digital download. It's a PDF document and short audio clips if you prefer to listen. And it includes specific instructions and tips about how to interview your characters. Because it sounds a little wacko, you sitting there talking to yourself. But I lay out the basics of interviewing, what kinds of questions to ask, how to get your characters talking to you, what to do if they won't speak to you. Like I said, it sounds weird, especially if you talked about this to people who don't write. My husband, who does write, doesn't write fiction, but even he gave me this kind of look, said, you're just sitting there talking to yourself, right? But no, it's not actually that. Not actually that. It's a way for writers to get inside their characters' hearts and minds, which is where you want your readers to be. So it's also a different way to tap into your creativity. It's more of that pantsing, go with the flow kind of feel, I think, when it really gets going. And you get to interact with your characters and ask them questions outside of your actual story itself and get answers to basically anything you want to know. So this tool brings together all my tips plus some sample interviews so that writers can get started fast. I mean, I sang 5 minutes. Did it take you longer than that?
I think it took me 20 because I just took my time and kind of meandered through it. And what wound up happening is I got kind of this character who went, well, let me tell you. And that turned into actually writing scenes from the past, which was really informative. I have no idea if those pieces or bits will be used in the novel. Probably not, but it was incredibly informative just to know this person's lived experience.
Yes. You get access to backstory.
Yeah.
And whether or not that actually shows up on the page, it does impact what you choose to put on the page.
Oh, it 100% actually did. Now that I'm thinking about it, it became a breadcrumb, a clue that one of the other characters finds. There was something in there that they revealed to me that I then later planted in as a clue. So it was quite handy.
Good.
So you recommend not only interviewing your protagonist, but other characters. And I'd love to know why you make that recommendation.
So one reason to interview other characters is just to get out of that headspace, get out of that particular eye that you're always occupying as you're writing your story. So it's a great way to get another character's point of view about things. As you mentioned earlier about discovering things from a character about their backstory. Other characters you probably haven't spent a lot of time thinking about compared to your main character. And yet it seems like our subconsciousness are working on these things even without our direct, overt attention. So interviewing these other characters can give you access to that information.
Absolutely. Everybody in your story is going to have an agenda, whether or not they have a point of view. And your protagonist's agenda and the other characters' agendas can collide, and that gives you beautiful conflict. And so I found it very helpful interviewing, my antagonist, a couple of my side characters for that purpose, because it's not always the protagonist driving the story bus.
Right. Yeah.
It may look like that, but it's not always the case. Right. So when is the best time for a writer to use this tool? Story development, drafting, revising, anytime you're stuck.
I think being stuck is a great time, but depending on what kind of writer you are, you can use it at the beginning if you want to just explore. In fact, that's how I used it when I was working on my mystery novel. I started interviewing my antagonist, the character who perpetrates the main crime, and that was really enlightening. I didn't know most of what she told me. So that was early on. I knew just the basics, like her age. This is an older person, not a kid character in the story. Yeah, so it's good for development. It's good for when you're stuck. Or if you want to just feel productive, you can shoot the report on the actual manuscript itself. Take 10 minutes and talk to one of your characters and see what they're up to today. And be creative without the stress.
I love that. Great recommendations. Are there any myths about character building that you want to bust?
I don't think you need to know everything about your characters to write compelling fiction, but you do need to know the important things. And I can't tell you what those are. You have to find those out for yourself.
Yeah. But if you start by understanding what they want as best you can, what they might be lacking as a human, and what they are afraid of and why, you have a good jumping off point.
And characters are not necessarily all human. So I work in Kidlit, so there are plenty of characters who are aliens or dragons or dogs or ghosts or whatever. I recently read a novel, I'm just looking at it here, Olivetti. It's a middle grade novel. Olivetti is the brand name of a typewriter. And so the main character, one of the main characters is actually a talking typewriter.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
This week, I was talking to one of my clients. She's trying to figure out the core mystery of a proposed young adult science fiction series. And she's just having a tough time. She's interviewed lots of different characters. And I said, what about the objects at this place? What kind of objects are there that might have knowledge about what was going on that she could tap into because they've been around and seen it all?
Yeah. And it's funny because it can be just like one question that you never thought of that unlocks so much. Yeah. That is the beauty and benefit of working in collaboration with a coach who coming at you with questions that make you think, and you go, I didn't consider that angle. Right on. Cool. Yeah, so you don't need to know everything. You do need to know some important things. That's going to vary depending on the type of character that you're exploring, which basically sounds like, nothing's for sure, and it all depends.
I know, I'll know what it's not such a dissatisfying answer, but I don't think it's full.
I would say that, if we're creating people or entities, this is hard, right? So we have the psychology, we have the physiology, and we have the sociology, right? And if all we do is lean on the physical for our character development and don't think too much about the other pieces, the risk for me, what I have done in the past is I have borrowed from other books and other mediums and have created characters without a lot of thought. And so then made stereotypical characters without realizing I did it. So it's not easy. And I think those are the three things that we have to think about on some level. Right. Or we risk having just cliche type cardboard characters that readers can't relate to.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to wrap up here in just a few. A couple more questions. What is the best piece of writing advice you've ever received?
I was told the answers to my story questions can usually be found in my story already. So often we want to maybe pull something else in, add a new character, add a new subplot, add whatever, when instead maybe we're not using what's there to its fullest potential, or there's too much there. I interviewed published novelist named Sally J. Baugh, a middle grade writer, a couple of years ago about her approach. And she realized for one of her novels, she started with quite a large family. Her main character had 5 or 6 siblings. And she realized she didn't need all those. She only needed one to contrast with Stanley. It's often, about taking things out. So answers are probably in your story already.
Yeah, it sounds like wide versus deep kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's so much ambiguity in writing. You just got to get in there and play in the mud for so much of it. Okay, what wish would you like to impart to your fellow writers who might be out there who are struggling to get to know their characters?
Take your time back to your characters as you get to know them. I did interviews early on for my middle grade mystery. It's set at a fictional version of the Lake Superior Zoo in Duluth, Minnesota. And then after I finished the draft and was going back to revision, I went back and did some more interviewing, and I learned new things. Like you mentioned earlier, it's always layers. You can't get everything in one pass, and that's true with interviewing characters and getting to know your characters too. It's just like human beings. You and I know each other a little bit, but if we actually lived close to each other, it could interact in real life. That would probably add some really fun dimension. It's the same with characters.
I love that. That's such a great answer. Well, where can we find your tool, Interview for Insight?
It is on my website, micheleregenold.com.
Okay, I will make sure I drop the link in the show notes. So where can listeners find you?
They can find me at micheleregenold.com. Interview for Insight is right at the top.
Can you spell your last name for us?
Well, I'll spell bold because Michele is a bold. I think it's MicheleRegenold.
Beautiful. Okay, Michele, thank you so much for your time today. And listeners, please do yourself a favor and get a hold of the Interview for Insight from Michele because it is a very helpful tool. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Michele. I will make sure to post the links to the resources that we talked about today, including Interview for Insight, into the show notes. And while you're there, don't forget to download the First Draft Confidence, the free workbook and introductory guide to all the foundation work that my clients complete before they begin drafting. So it helps you prevent the false starts and the abandoned drafts and say goodbye to the first draft flail. So again, if you want to download that, you can go to the link in the show notes or go to writeitscared.co/novel planning guide. And I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Write It Scared podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please make sure to hit the follow button so you never miss an episode. And please leave a review. Reviews help other writers like you find the voices and messages they need to hear to continue to write their stories. Let's lift each other up. Remember, you can be scared and still be unstoppable. I'll see you next week.